Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Nick. I am a huge DeLorean fanatic. If you're new here, I would highly recommend subscribing. We're going to have a ton of cool projects to work on this channel. We have tons of DeLoreans. We have a very rare amphibious vehicle. There's only 13 of them ever made, and we got 3 of them here. We have a Ski-Doo Elite, a side-by-side twin-track snowmobile. It has a cigarette lighter in it. We have a Fiero with a supercharged 3800 motor in it. We got a Miata, we got an S2000. We have a VW Westfalia. We have tons of jet skis, old school stand-up jet skis. We have little boats that we're going to be tinkering with. If you're new here, I would highly recommend subscribing to this channel. If you're into this old stuff, we're going to be working on it all this year. With your help and my help, hopefully we can get them to run.
Ever seen a DeLorean pull a DeLorean? Hey everyone, just a quick reminder, if you have not seen my original Barn Find DeLorean video, go to the top of the video right now and click the link. Go watch that video and then come back to here. This video will make a ton more sense. In this video series, it's going to be the revival of this DeLorean that me and my father had found that had been sitting in a barn since 1986. With your help and mine, hopefully we can get it to run. For those of you who have seen the video, welcome back. This is going to be part 1 of the revival restoration of this DeLorean barn find. In part 1, we're going to be discussing the history of this car. How did it get there? Why was it left? What did I find in the car? How many miles are on it? All of that's going to be answered in part 1. So without further ado, let's jump into part 1, the story of the barn find DeLorean. Back when I was about 8 years old, I saw Back to the Future for the very first time. I had fallen in love with the movie instantly. I loved the car, I loved Marty McFly, I loved the whole trilogy series. It was really good. So I told myself when I was 16 years old, I was gonna go buy a DeLorean. I wanted to be Marty McFly in my teenage years. But as I got closer to being 16 years old, I found out how expensive these cars were. Not only that, but I had never worked mechanically on a car in my life. So by the time I was 16, I told myself when I'm in my 30s, I want to buy one of these cars. It didn't hit me until I was about 18 when I really started pushing for a DeLorean. I really wanted one. And I had set off to start buying and selling these stand-up jet skis. I'd never really worked on a car, just very small engines. and I just like to tinker with them. I'd like to see if they could get them to work with putting a little work into them, maybe a lot of work into them. It was all kind of a mystery for me, and I really enjoyed that. So I'd go and buy these stand-up jet skis because A, they're unique, people loved them, they're fun to ride, and they're pretty easy to work on. So after buying and selling a couple of these stand-up jet skis, I figured this may work as just a part-time thing. I enjoyed working on this stuff, and the stand-up jet skis were pretty sought after in my area. So I set out and I bought and sold a ton of them. When I was 21, I finally decided it's time to start looking. I'd set out to look for a couple of ads, and I placed a couple of ads, and I got a ton of scammers back. So after going through countless scammer emails, I finally came across one real person looking to sell me their DeLorean. They told me it was a black interior, and it had an automatic transmission, and it was sitting outside for quite some time. They were also an attorney too. They were kind of leery with details about it, which kind of set me off. I was a little bent on getting a gray interior with a 5-speed, just like what Marty McFly drove in Back to the Future, so I kind of kept that one in my back pocket and didn't pull the trigger on it yet. It wasn't until months later that I got another email from a woman from Ohio looking to sell her DeLorean. It was her husband, and he had passed away from pancreatic cancer. She told me that her son and him bought it together brand new in 1981, and they went into it together. From 1981 to 2003, they both switched off driving it. It accumulated 40,000 miles by the time it was parked away. She had told me that it was parked because the transmission was bad on it. Now, keep in mind, I had never worked on a car in my life. After waiting for pictures for it and more info, she didn't know anything really about the car. She just told me to come and look at it. But from Wisconsin to Ohio was quite a hike, and she didn't really know what price she wanted for it. But me and my dad set out to go and check it out. So me and my dad had set out from Wisconsin to Ohio to go check out the DeLorean. After walking around it, we made a deal with her and we brought it home. Now, keep in mind, the car hasn't ran since 2003. So I did a full check over with it, and I came to find out that the master cylinder in the front for the clutch was bad. The transmission was fine. I ended up doing a lot of safety things to my car, just like what we're going to do in the barn find DeLorean, such as fuel lines, which is one of the main things you have to look at in the DeLoreans, being rubber and pressurized. Those have to be changed. We're going to discuss more of that later in the barn find DeLorean video. So after doing a bunch of safety precautions to my DeLorean, I got to finally drive it for the first time, and I couldn't believe it. I had never driven stick in my life. I had never worked on a car in my life. All I did was read a bunch of DeLorean books, read a bunch of forums, talk to a lot of people, and we got it to run. If you guys haven't seen my first start on this car, check out the link at the top of the video and go and check it out. After talking to my dad and persuading him to drive my DeLorean, he fell in love with it too. The only problem he has is that the pedals are really close in a manual transmission DeLorean, and his feet are kind of big, so they always kept rubbing up and down against each other when you go and take it for a drive. So he said if you ever came across an automatic DeLorean, let me know. Now if you remember in the beginning of the story, I came across the automatic transmission in Iowa first. So I sent him an email, still seeing if he wanted to sell it. He still wanted to sell it, and me and my dad headed off to Iowa to go and pick up his car. Here we are at my dad's car. This is the black interior automatic transmission that we picked up from Iowa. Now, when he told us the story that it's had out for some time, he was right. The sun took a beating on the interior, the fascia on the front, and the rear. The paint was totally flaking off. The whole dash was cracked, the binnacle was cracking, the steering wheel was cracking. It took a very, very hard hit with the sun. We ended up making a deal and driving back to Wisconsin and bringing it back and cleaning it up. Of course, we went through the mechanicals, which we're going to be doing on the barn find, and now we're working on the interior. If you guys would like to see more on this car, leave a comment down below. I read all the comments, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. So after joining a couple of Facebook groups and DeLorean forums, I had a lot of questions about this. Like I said, I was still kind of new to the whole mechanical stuff, and I had never done interior work in my life. So I had a lot of questions. How do you take apart this? How to take apart that? And somebody caught wind that I lived in this small town in Wisconsin. They said somebody in the 80s from my town used to sell DeLoreans, and if they're still in business, I should go talk to them and see if they got any leftovers. So, after I did some research, they were right in my town and still in business. Me and my dad drove over there and went to talk to him. So when me and my dad got there, I had a ton of questions for him. He told me a ton of stories and how he had paint DeLoreans to sell them because nobody wanted them. He told me all of his unique advertising he did to try to sell them. It was really cool, and I learned a lot of history from him. I asked him if he had any brochures or magazines or parts or anything from the 80s. He said all of it was gone, and I shook his hand, and as we were about to leave, my dad jokingly said, "If you know anyone looking to sell DeLorean, let us know." That's when he waved us back in. He said, "Come take a seat." We sat back down, and he told us that in the late 90s, he had somebody reach out to him about a DeLorean that had been sitting in a barn since the 80s, and he was looking to sell it. All he told me was that it was an attorney from Milwaukee, and I set off to go find that person. I had sent an email to every single attorney in the Milwaukee area, and I got one email back. And sure enough, it was his phone number, and he said, "I still have it. Shoot me a call." I immediately rushed outside. I went to call him. He told me he still had it. He was in Florida until the spring, and when he came back from Florida, that we should meet up and go and see the DeLorean. And that's where the DeLorean barn find came. We ended up making a deal with him, as you guys saw in the video, and it turned out great. Me and my dad had split this DeLorean together, and that is how we got all three of the DeLoreans. So now, let's start with the questions. How did it get there, and why? The story that I was told was that the attorney had bought a piece of property, and this property was about an hour north of him. It was his up north. He decided to buy this property because it was a ton of acreage and it was right on the coast of Lake Michigan. At the time, it was a beautiful property, but over the time, it got a little decayed and it started falling apart. Tree limbs were laying everywhere, the grass was overgrown, the fields no longer could grow corn anymore. It was in pretty rough shape. He'd bought the property for his daughter. He was going to turn it all into a horse farm. All that was on the property was a barn. That was it. He had a couple fields behind him that he was going to convert into a horse stable. He was going to make horse trails, and it was going to be for him, his daughter, and his wife to ride horses. After he bought the farm, he got pretty busy with work being an attorney. His daughter got older, and she kind of left the horse game. She wanted nothing to do with horses anymore. She went off to college, and he kept getting busier with work, and so the property sat, abandoned, just sitting. When he bought the car brand new in 1981, he drove it until 1986, and that's when it sat. It sat at his house for quite some time, and he had cars coming and going with his daily cars every day. He couldn't just leave the car there, so he put it at his only available property he had, right up at the barn. It wasn't until the late 90s when he finally decided he was going to do something with the car. He was either going to sell it to the person that I found out this information from, or he was going to give it to his son for high school graduation. He was going to send the car down to DMC, Texas for complete restoration, but he didn't really know how to go about that. And keep in mind, he's an attorney. He was very, very busy. It wasn't until he finally approached his son and he said, "Would you like the DeLorean as a restoration project?" He wanted nothing to do with the DeLorean. He was more interested in Mercedes, what I was told. So the car sat until I found out about it in 2018. When me and my father got to the property, it was in pretty bad shape. As I was saying before, the grass was really tall, the tree limbs were laying everywhere, the fields were overgrown. When you got inside the barn, they had a really, really bad raccoon problem. There's raccoon poop everywhere. There's tracks on top of the DeLorean, there's tracks around the DeLorean. They were making nests in there. It was in very bad shape. The attorney had been to the property since 1986. He brought a ton of keys with him. And Once we were outside with the attorney, he told us he had no keys at all for the DeLorean, which means we couldn't open anything in the car. The front opens up from the inside, the louvers open up from the inside, and obviously the doors open from the inside. I tried the passenger side door, and sure enough, it was locked. I looked through the passenger side window into the driver's side, and I saw that the driver's side door was unlocked. The only bad part was the handle was busted off. My dad's a contractor, and he had some tools in his car. We grabbed the vice grips, and we popped it open, and you couldn't believe what it smelled like in there. After looking at the car and doing some inspection to it, we were a little leery on the car itself. Now, the only bad thing about the car is the frame. Unfortunately, in 1981, when he bought the car, he was told it was stainless. It could beat anything. So he drove it through the winter, and it took a toll on it. Now, what most people don't know is that the DeLorean is stainless steel panels bolted onto a fiberglass tub on a steel frame. The steel frame is epoxy coated, and what happens is that the epoxy coat will separate from the frame, and moisture gets behind the epoxy coating, and it rots away at the frame. So the frame may look beautiful until you start peeling away that epoxy, and that'll reveal all the rust. That is the problem with this car. After we noticed that the frame wasn't in the best of shape, it kind of took us a while to figure out what we were going to do with it. After back and forth talking about it, we finally decided to pull the trigger together as a father and son to buy this DeLorean. And that's how we ended up with 3 DeLoreans. Now, I actually found 2 DeLoreans before finding the barn find one, and I passed on them for certain reasons. The first one I found had been sitting outside at an estate since 1985, and it was in really, really bad shape. The interior was the worst I'd ever seen. Water had got into it. The entire inside was cracked. Every single piece of plastic, molded together rubber, you name it, it was cracked. It was in very, very bad shape. Not only that, but almost every panel on the car was hit from snow plows over the years. One of the people that lived at the house backed into it on accident. It was in very bad shape. Now, what intrigued me about it was that it had a twin island turbo system in it. I'd never seen a turbo on a DeLorean, and this had twins on it. I did a little bit of research, and I guess DeLorean played with this in the early 80s. I don't know too much info on it, but it was really cool to see, and it had an interesting setup to it. Now, the second DeLorean actually kind of fell into my lap. This person contacted a person that I knew, asking for some Mercedes parts, and they said they had a DeLorean that was in their house, in their basement. And my friend had reached out to me saying that, hey, a person in my town has a DeLorean and they're looking to sell it. It was their father's, and he had passed away just a year prior to them wanting to sell a DeLorean. He had a couple cars in his basement. He had a Super Beetle, he had a truck that was in there, and a DeLorean. And it was really close to me, like it was 10 houses down from me. Me and my father drove over there to check it out. It had been sitting since 1994, and the car was in beautiful shape. It was a black interior, it was a 5-speed, the engine was beautiful, every body panel was straight. The person kept very, very good care of the car. The only reason I took a pass on it was because it had a salvage title, but other than that, it was a beautiful car. I just wanted one with a clean title. Other than the frame, this car seems to be in very great shape from what we can see. The interior was enclosed since 1986 in a dark barn, so it looks beautiful. It looks just like how it did in 1981. We did do a light clean over of mold and mice poop just to get a little bit of the smell out of there, and we threw a bunch of dryer sheets in there to try to evict any mice out of there. Other than that, the car has been untouched. It still has most of the barn find dust all over it and all that. The tires still have a bit of straw on them from the hay bales that used to be in there from when he was going to make it into a horse farm. It has been untouched. We haven't even washed it besides the rain that hit us that day we picked it up. Now let's talk a bit about the mileage on this car. We had a lot of people guess what it was, and if you remember from the video, he said that it had between 30 and 40,000 miles on it. When we got there and we got the door open, I peeked my head in, because remember, the interior was pretty gross. I peeked my head in, I saw 42. So to me, 42,000 miles. which seemed like it was in the range that he remembered by. It wasn't until we got it home and I did my quick little clean out of the inside. I popped open the glove box and I found a lot of original paperwork. Inside of the glove box, we found the original DeLorean pouch. Now this came original with the car. You'd open it up and it had inside anything you wanted to keep in it. Warranty cards, the original owner's manual book, which when you open it up, you can see the tabs at the bottom, and it talks about engine maintenance, pre-drive check, etc., etc. And you can go through it and you can find everything about the car, about the maintenance items on it. This was inside of the car, which I thought was pretty cool. So I kept digging and I found even more. Underneath the pouch, we found emission warranties for 1981 new vehicles. We found 1981 vehicles maintenance schedule record. This was like a little book that you could keep and open up, and when you go and take it in for service, you know, you could write down who did it, you know, when was it done. We found the DeLorean consumer information. We found the national dealer list. This will tell you everywhere in 1981 that was dealing DeLoreans in every single state, which is really cool. We found the original Craig warranty system. Craig speakers were the original speakers that came throughout the DeLorean. This was inside of there. We found a couple of warranty cards that were unused. He never sent them back. They wanted some information, DeLorean back in the day, about your car. He never filled these out. He never sent them back. Those were in there. Now, all the way at the bottom was this yellow piece of paper, which I thought was kind of interesting. It kind of looked like a service paper to me. So, sure enough, I opened it up, and it was a service paper. It was one he had the car serviced in 1986. May 22nd of 1986, he took his DeLorean in to be serviced, and there's 3,981 miles put onto it. Now, if you'll remember from the video, he parked it in 1986. The plates even show it. So, how many miles are on the DeLorean? Well, everyone, that's going to do it for part one of the DeLorean Barn Find Revival series. In part one, we talked about the story of the car and the history of it. In part two, we're going to dig a little deeper into that engine bay, start cleaning out the Valley of Death, start learning about the fuel system and cleaning it, and so forth. I really want to thank you for checking out the series. Make sure to watch for part two. And like I said in the beginning, if you're into this vintage stuff just like me, hit that subscribe button. We're going to be working on a bunch of this old stuff throughout 2020. Until then, I'll see you in part two.